right. Continue to keep your hands up. If you know where that water came from, is it Kaveri, is it borewell, is it a mix? Do you know where that water came from? If you do, keep your hands up. If not, you can put the hands down. All right, great. Now, continue to keep your hand up. If you know the name of the river through which your city, your township, or whatever gets the water. All right, the hands seem to come down again and again. All right, final trick question. Hands up, continue to keep them up. If you know where the water goes after you waste it. There you go. There's probably one or two. Vipin's the only one who knows. All right. Oh, there you go. One other kid. Do you know where your water is going after you wasted it? Sewage. There you go. Lovely. All right. Awesome. Now, you can put your hands down. Thank you so much. Everybody can put their hands down. I got very curious about this when, as an urban dweller, I seem to really do a lot of wastage when I have my hot bath or in the tub, or just simply use the tap without knowing where the water is coming from. So I thought, why can't we go and ask 4 or 5 or 6 or how many ever people who will be able to answer. And luck behold, we had some of the superstars who have been fighting the water ecosystem for urban dwellers for a long time with us today. So we want to start by understanding the source. We will then move into what happens for our water during transit, because it seems to be very important. And then the destination, which is the cup or the glass of water you have every day in the morning. And then when you wash them and then it goes through sewage, where does it go? So today we want to understand these 4 layers of that glass of water you drank this morning. And hopefully by the time you go back, you're able to at least keep your hands up for 2, if not 3 of those questions I'd asked. Does that make sense? Let's get started. So with me, I've got Shashank. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves when I ask a question. It's easier that way rather than me introducing them. Then I've got Avinash, I've got Madhuri, and then I've got Naren. And I'm going to start with Naren, given that you are at the source of it. What I understand is when we were interacting, Naren, you mentioned that you are literally been researching at the point where the Kaveri gets dissected into our city, and you've been doing a lot of work there. One curious question I had is there seems to be some correlation between the health of fishes in that ecosystem and our drinking water we have in Whitefield or in Bellandur or elsewhere. Could you talk about your world, what you do at that Anikat diversion, and then what have you seen that some of us would love to learn from?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Naren. I work with an organization called the Wildlife Association of South India, and we're a member-based society. We generally compose of people who are enthusiastic about wildlife, about fishing as an activity, about birding, photography, whatever it might be. And one of the areas that this organization has been working in for a long time, over 20 years now, is a place called Shivanasamudram. Have any of you heard of that? I'm sure many of you would have seen the fantastic photographs of the waterfalls. Yeah? So this area is very important, because if you follow the elevation of the Kaveri, right? So when we talk about where our water comes from, where the source is, the true source of the Kaveri is actually up in the Western Ghats, right? In a place called Talakaveri. There's a little spring where it starts from, and it's so amazing. There's actually one tiger right now that's kind of roaming around that area, and he comes and sits on the front gate of Talakaveri, where the temple is, right? It's that wild a place. And the river then flows down and hits Shivasamudram, where the Deccan Plateau kind of ends, right? So that's where the river flows off the Deccan Plateau. It cascades off it for another 100, 150 kilometers. And this gives rise to an absolutely amazing ecosystem. Also opportunity for us to tap water from there because of that elevation gradient. So at a place called Satyagala, where the old Kollegal bridge used to be, just below that, about half a kilometer downstream of there, there's been a huge dam that has been created, like a weir. It's a check dam, not very large, but the essential idea is that we divert water from there to Bangalore city, to various pumping stations. So what we do there is we work on ecology, right? So when I talk about ecology, we focus on animals, we focus on fish, what's happening underwater, what's happening with the birds, etc. And I'll tell you that this is one of the most stunning places that I have ever worked in, right? It's got animals, it's got tigers there, it's got leopards there, it's got one of the largest populations of Asian elephants, right? There are wolves, Indian grey wolves that are running around there, hyenas, right? Do we all know that we get hyenas in India, right? Hyenas, honey badgers, grizzle giant squirrels, humpback marsia. There's a whole ecosystem out there that is absolutely thriving even today. Right? So it's not all doom and gloom. The point being that this area is also contiguous with a protected area, formal protected area called the Kaveri Wildlife Sanctuary. That's just downstream of this. And right, I'm sure we'll get to the eventual where our water goes after that, and we'll plug that bit in later. But this area in Shivasamudram, when you talk about, there are certain ways in which you look at water, right? When you say where's your source of water coming from, there's one popular lens that comes out, right? If you could look at it from the lens of, from a utilitarian perspective, really, where we create dams, we divert water, we send water to Bangalore. Bangalore's at an elevation, I think about 300 meters above Shivasamudram, so water has to be pumped uphill, over 100 kilometers. That takes a lot of energy, right? So where does your water come from? You could look at it from a way in which you say, yeah, it's coming from those pumping stations. It's coming from all those engineers and those experts that are sitting there running those pumps 24 by 7, right? That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is from an ecological lens. And that is something that we tend to ignore in many ways, right? I was just telling Madhuri earlier, when I was a little kid in Bangalore, right, I used to go to school, so I had to walk about 500 meters to go to my bus stand. And this was in the middle of Bangalore city, right next to Trinity Circle. And if you remember back then, we had these granite stones that were laid along the footpaths. And while I was walking as a little kid, I would look down in the little drain there, and I would see fish. There would be fish swimming around in those drains. And it was one of my, hobbies was to go there and try and catch one of those fish. I never ended up catching anything. But they're little tiny fish. And now when I think back, they were all native fish that were still swimming around in the middle of Bangalore city, right? So when you look at a freshwater body, right? Many of you would have been to a river. You've all gone and stood beside a river. And it's beautiful. Right? You've got these lush evergreen trees, you've got maybe wildlife running around, all of this kind of stuff. But what we don't see is what's happening underwater. And that's where my work comes in, right? So I work across different things. I work with underwater scuba divers, where we ask them to go into rivers and try and photograph what they see underwater so that we can all then start to look at it. And I think later we'll have a presentation with some of those stunning photographs that you guys should check out. We also do a lot of ecological research because we want to learn from the animals that live in this space, right? We don't necessarily rely on just a water testing kit, right, which during the right time of the year, during the monsoon, when the water is flowing past, will show you fantastic results, right? We're looking at something a little more long-term. So what we do is we study a species of fish called the marsia. And this is a species that we are promoting as a flagship species, right? The idea being that if we can create an ecosystem that is ideal for this one species, a migratory species, by virtue of protecting it, we protect all the other species below it, including the habitat itself, right? So this is a little bit about what's happening at the source. And when you take a look at some of those visuals that we have, you will really understand, look at your source of water differently.
Yeah. Please do. Thank you, Naren. And we are going to send a photo album for all of you who have attended as a blast. with all of Naren's photographs. We're trying to arrange a slideshow in that room once the movie is done also, so you get to see it. And I've seen it and it's breathtaking. I always thought frogs have beautiful eyes, but after seeing some of your photographs, I feel like fishes have more beautiful eyes than frogs in some way or another. Maybe it's because I haven't gone underwater to see it. But thank you, Naren. Madhuri, sorry, you were saying something?
Said you're the first person to say that. But okay.
Okay, all right. Madhuri, I'm going to move to you. You were an engineer, and you have this fanatical reason to move towards studying waterways and lakes, and what you've done with Pani.Earth and what you're doing. What have you seen at source that some of us can hear about where the water is, what is happening there, and as it moves from the source into transit? If you could walk us through that.
I think before I start, I want to ask all of you, how many of you know of the rivers in our backyard? Okay, so I'm happy to see some hands. Yes, I mean, I want to move away from Kaveri and talk about the rivers in our own backyard, right? Which is the Arkavati. We are in the Rishabhavati watershed, which joins Arkavati river and then joins Kaveri. So, and then we have the Dakshin Pinakini. We have a lot of other smaller rivers, but we have a lot of streams on which our really celebrated lakes that they were talking about were built. So we have forgotten our streams, we have engineered them into drains, we try to move them away from our homes so that we can take up that space. We let all our wastewater into it, and eventually it flows into the rivers. So I asked the same question because I bought a home right next to something called Kengeri Mori. That's how it's addressed. Only after I, spent a lot of time, talking to the BWSSB officials who would constantly keep saying it's Kengeri Mori, but Google Maps is showing me it's a river. I'm not from Bangalore. So I was trying to understand what does this mean and how did I end up with a river. I want to just share a small story, which is, this was way back in 2006-07, when solid waste was a big issue in Bangalore. You've heard of the Mavalipura landfill, right? So we were dumping it in somebody else's backyard. When they said no, all the waste started piling up in Bangalore, and we were looking at, what to do. So I was, one of those who felt good about recycling. And I would think, okay, if I recycle, it's great. I'm a perfect human being. But I actually follow the trail. And then I saw a lot of recyclers actually next to this thing called the Kengeri Mori, which is Rishabhavati river. And they dump whatever they don't want into the river. That's how my first glimpse of the river happened. So when we talk about taking water from here, right, I would like to talk about the connection that Bangalore has with Kaveri itself. We use Kaveri, the way Naren has explained, which is we pump water from that thing. But we abuse Kaveri. How do we abuse Kaveri? Is we let out all our waste, whether it's solid waste, domestic sewage, industrial effluents, anything we don't want. It eventually ends up in Arkavati river, 50% of Bangalore's sewage. And then it just goes down and meets Kaveri at Sangama. Sangama is where Gali Bore, Bhimeshwari, all of you must have visited that place, right? So that's where we send all our pollutants down. Now the river has a way to treat some of the domestic sewage that we put because it can break it down. But the inorganic pollutants, right, the chemical pollution, it doesn't have the capacity to break it down. So we did a study where we looked at from the source of Arkavati, which is Nandi Hills, down all the way till Sangama, and we found that while the organic pollution reduces, these things remain dissolved, that the fish is something that we can see, but the macroinvertebrates, eggs, right, they're not able to survive. The damselflies, the dragonflies, their insects are struggling. Our freshwater ecosystems are in a big crisis. So so if I just imagine this, and this is where I, pump Kaveri, Arkavati meets here. That is, I take water from upstream and I send, Bangalore sends bad water to Kaveri. So that is what we do, and that's where we're talking about the Kaveri Wildlife Sanctuary. So I don't know what the impact we have on these beings because we can't go beyond human beings actually. And to not even stop at that, right? Bangalore today is like we use Kaveri, we use a lot of borewell water, right? Groundwater. Now groundwater is just rivers underground and surface water is rivers above. That's how I look at it, as they're all connected. And lakes are just stopping points in between. But today we design our lakes to make it so deep because we want just water and leave the ecosystem aside. That's what happens. And the second thing that we also do is that we forget that, the thirst that we have for water, Kaveri water, right? We went into the 5th stage now. That doesn't solve, Bangalore's thirst. We are going all the way to Western Ghats now to get water from Yettinhole River, the river that flows actually and joins Arabian Sea, right? We are trying to say, oh, that water is waste. Bangaloreans need it. The Bangalore industry needs it. Let's bring that water. And that's in the heart of Western Ghats. Right? There are so many wildlife corridors there, and I don't know what happens to the animals when we do these projects which dig pipelines, where we stood in one of the pipelines where a 6-footer just held his hand like this and the pipe was even bigger than that, tunneled through those hills. So that's where we are at with a Bangalore's water story. The destruction trail goes all the way to Western Ghats.
It's quite scary when you spoke about it when we met. I went and did some research around it. I couldn't drink water after that. After realizing how much of water are we taking away from for Bangalore, but from elsewhere, and then giving polluted water. And that's where you come in. I read one of your paperwork on the Jakkur Lake and what you've done. You've gone to the depths to look at the data and understand the transit of it. One of the interesting things I learned was Bangalore BWSSB, sorry. Yeah. They spend close to 25 crores a month on electricity just to pull the water off that 100 meters odd we were talking about. But what I also learned is it's like the internet, there is a lot of leakage. So it's not like we are pulling all the water. There seem to be a ton of leakage, and you've done a lot of that study about it, Shashank. So why don't you walk us through what happens? Okay, let's assume that there is clean water coming from there, and let's assume Bangalore won. Are we doing a good job even pulling it all the way here? What's happening in transit?
So, my name is Shashank and I'm a hydrologist. So my role is basically to kind of find out how does the water go through the city and what happens once it reaches, like he mentioned. So the way that I'll just give you, like he mentioned, right? So the bill actually,
Avinash.
So the bill actually that BWSSB pays for electricity is 3 crores per day. So just imagine on a monthly basis, there's 900 crores of, 90 crores of just electricity bill. There is nothing else. Though the treatment is different, the whatever other costs of putting pipes in the city, that is different. Everything is different, and only 90 crores per month is going to give the water to the taps. And again, like I would like to kind of you guys to imagine basically, like if a person needs roughly 130 liters of water per day for like showering, bathing, laundry, utensils, cooking, everything. So a bucket is a 20-liter bucket. So you need 6 buckets of water ideally every day. And now imagine trying to bring water 300 meters up. So 300 meters is roughly 100 floors. So can you, like, what kind of energy and effort is being put into sending this water every day to the tap 300 meters up? And something that I would like to, you guys, if you haven't visited, is that if you go towards Kanakpura or Mekedatu, you see these huge pipes, like they are 10 feet of pipe which is like a floor, and they are sending this water up. And it's like, it's sad and at the same time like amazing to see that people are doing this, or engineers are doing this to provide the city with water. So a lot of this, often when we kind of are not connected to where the water is coming from, you simply think that the water is coming from the tap, but that's not true, right? There's a huge infrastructure setup that goes behind this. And like you mentioned, right? So are we, like after all the effort that we are putting into getting the water to the city, how judiciously are we using it? So right now, 70% of all the water in the city that is being consumed by people for like our day-to-day uses, cooking, drinking, showering, all of these. So we are still, like, I think the biggest consumers, but also we hold the most amount of power to kind of make sure that the water is judiciously used. And of course, like the Kaveri pipeline started in the 1960s. So the areas in Baswangudi, Malleshwaram, the old city, so these all have these old pipes which are extremely leaky. They are like, so on an average, there is 50% to 30% loss depending on where you stay in the city. So the water is not like from your local the water tank, it's not actually reaching your tap. 50% of is ideally getting into the ground. And that's why actually a lot of places in the central city have high borewell. So your borewell does not need to go very deep to tap water because the water levels are really high, because the pipes are leaking. It's not that we are doing a lot of recharge in the city. It's the pipes are leaking, and so first of all you're getting less supply in your tap, and then you are turning on your borewell to take the water which is technically leaking out of the pipes into the ground. And then also what else is happening in the city, within the city, right? So a lot of mention has been around lakes. So there were maybe couple of hundred years ago, 1,000 lakes, but now we have only 183 on paper. And out of that, I would hardly say any of them are like, means how many of you would like to take a dip into the lakes in Bangalore? I mean, I would highly be against it that if you did that. So that is because a lot of the way that we look at water or water bodies has to do with if it's our drinking water source. If it's not, then we often see them only as open spaces, as a park, as a walking track, as a gazebo, or like a place to like just hang out in the evening after a day of work. But how much of it do you, when you go to a lake, do you see the water in it and not the other facilities available around it? And that is where I feel like a huge amount of influence can be put to people who are regularly going around lakes to actually demand a better lake, a better city in terms of its water, and also like contribute towards how do you like want your lake to be. And that is where I think you can influence the BBMP or the GBA or like the BWSSB to kind of say that, okay, whatever we are doing, these typical engineering designs or structures, we don't want those. We want it to be an ecological space. We want it to be a community space. Are we looking at the people who used to rely on lakes for, like, say, dhobis or pastoralists who would let their cows in to graze around the lake? How many of you actually see cows in the lakes these days? Like, if you go to Alsur Lake, do you think you'll run into a cow there? So all these people who have their livelihoods linked to these lakes are not able to access it anymore. So that is where I feel that we should be kind of reaching out to these people also, but take them as the people who are reliant on lakes rather than just thinking of it a cycling or a walking track or a walking place.
Thank you, Shashank. Talking about community, Avinash, I want to move to you. From your profile, I get to understand that you are okay talking more to well diggers and plumbers than policymakers because their life is getting impacted. In a decade-long conversation and focus you've had, what's really happening at the destination for the non-privileged? For a lot of people, water is very privileged. We don't care about it. Apartment complex pays in the maintenance we are paying. But how is it impacting the larger community who are getting impacted at the destination within Bangalore? From all your research, please, Avinash.
Okay, so I think the conversation with the plumber and the well digger you referred to is more to learn from the plumber and the well digger and take that conversation to the policymaker, that bridge. But coming back to your question, I think there are many dimensions in which we can look at communities here, and you talked about water at the destination and what happens after that. When you dig a well or a bore well, there is a whole informal set of people who come and help you out, right? Be it the well diggers, be it, I mean, India extracts more groundwater than the US and China put together, and that's a humongous quantity of groundwater. And those who dig those wells that actually enable you to get that water, there's not one school, one formal institution that engages with them, right? It's completely the informal sector that drives it. Similarly, once you use your water and the water that goes as waste, the pipes, we may have the fanciest STPs to treat them, but when your pipe gets clogged or when things fail, the people who then go and fix it for you, unfortunately India's social history enters here, and it's a problem that we consistently try and deny, manual scavenging, where it's humans actually getting into the manholes, getting into the pits, getting into your STPs, going and taking that out. I mean, if they didn't do that, even your, the most advanced membrane bio-based reactor is not going to work, right? So one part of the communities is also to look at it from the livelihoods that are tied to this journey of water, from where it starts to where it ends up. But then there is the other dimension which you say, which is, what about the communities who live in low-income settlements, in slums, in jhopatpattis, or if you see now a lot of labor colonies? It's very interesting. That story is actually very interesting. Today, if you look at it, it's the water markets that are responding to their needs. They are paying 2 rupees, 3 rupees by the pot. So they are effectively paying much higher cost of water for the water that they get. Our institutions here have been failing to meet what is called the universal service requirements. That is, being able to reach services to everybody. The institutions are failing, and it's the markets that are responding, and these markets actually depend on groundwater. So incidentally, if you look at it, all the water that is leaked out of the pipes that Shashank just referred to is picked up when there were corporators, picked up by the corporators in water tankers, then supplied to many of these slums. But now it is increasingly the water tanker market who we want to paint as the mafia many times, but we have to recognize that they serve a need. So that's really what's happening from that side. But I also wanted to get a slightly broader kind of narrative into this conversation. We've spoken about ecology, we've spoken about the water resource itself, and we've spoken about communities and livelihoods the way it's tied. But if we take a zoom back in this larger narrative, if we trace the history of Bangalore, right, it's important that we do not lose sight that Bangalore has grown immensely, right? Bangalore's population, if you look at it, when its population was around 2.5 lakhs, right?
what we are consuming, is it evident? Are you seeing evidence from all the ecological aspect of all we spoke about, where the wastage is going, where the leakage is going? Could you talk to us a little bit about the impact you're seeing and the ground reality there?
Yeah, we're back. I almost screamed into this thing. Yeah. So, yeah, certainly. I myself personally have spent a lot of time in that area. So I've seen things change, right? Some of them are, I mean, you're only going to see it if you are really, really tuned in with how a river ecosystem actually functions. For example, you have certain species of trees that will survive only at a certain distance from the main channel of the river. As your water levels reduce year, these seeds are starting to be deposited at the wrong distance from the main channel of the river. A lot of these seeds are being lost. You know, it's nuanced things like that. But I think to answer your question, what I'm going to focus on is one single fish that I met last year. Right? So one of the projects that we do is that we track a species of fish called Marcia. It's a radio telemetry study. So we've got a little transmitter that's not even as large as my thumbnail. It sits on the back of the fish, right? And we tagged this fish last January in 2024. And her name was Mara. She was a 24-kilo fish, so she was about that big, a female. We tracked her and we followed her for 6 months through the summer, right? And it was, you know, the year 2024, if you guys tracked the water, it was an extreme drought year. I was honestly shocked being on that river, right? The whole river stopped flowing. There are huge, massive rapids that you find along the stretch of the river, like I mentioned earlier, cascades off the Deccan Plateau, fast-flowing rapids, right? And I could walk across without getting my feet wet. That's how bad it was. So all of these fish, all of these animals were then all localized to certain pools, right? And I was worried because what happens is when the water stops flowing, the water is not cooling anymore because it's not oxygenating, it's not cooling, right? And I was recording temperatures up to 33 degrees, 34 degrees. Ecologically speaking, our rivers shouldn't cross about 28. That's extremely high. Now what happens when water temperature rises is that its capability of holding onto oxygen tanks. I've seen, this is just last year, hundreds and thousands of fish, right? Not dead, but all up to the surface of the river and just gasping for air. Because that's where, you know, here and there breeze blows and, you know, oxygen is mixing with water. So there's a little more oxygen up there. And amongst that, huge crocodiles, 14 to 17 feet long, massive crocodiles. They just come straight out, boom, one gulp of fish and go back down. The fish don't even react, right? Now, I was so worried about the fish that we were tracking, Mara, right? Because we had its transmitter on her, and she was swimming around in that little area because she'd figured out, she's 10 to 12 years old. So she's figured out how to survive a drought. So she was in this one area, in a place called Galibore, a deep area, where she used to stay. And something happened in June and July of last year, right? Because we forget that all the water that's flowing through this area we're talking about, Shivasamudram, Kaveri wildlife, then continues on and flows into Tamil Nadu, right? And because it was such a drought year that year, there was pressure from Tamil Nadu to release water. And our deputy chief minister, if you remember right, was in the news for this because he was criticized for actually agreeing to release water, right? This is that dilemma that's been there. And he, in the end, decided that water has to be released. 8,000 cusecs of water was released over one day. Now, this would seem like a good thing, right? Even when I saw that water coming in, I was like, oh my God, finally, relief. But you know what happened? When that water comes in like that, in a monsoonal river, you know, in Kannada they say hosa neeru, the new water. For migratory fish like Mara, a female migratory fish, that is the cue for them to start migrating to spawn. So she took off upriver, right? And we, limited with our feet, running beside the river in the hot sun, we lost her. We just couldn't track her. Right? She took off really fast. For 5 weeks, we couldn't find her. We searched nearly 45 kilometers of the river, walking up and down. No signal from her. Until 5 weeks later, of course, and then we found her signal about, say, about 5 to 6 kilometers upriver of her summer home range. That was her safe haven, right? It was clear to us that she was moving back towards this space, but the signal was just constant. We were getting just a beep, beep for 2 days. We listened very carefully, absolutely no movement. We feared the worst, so what we did is we put on our goggles and all of that, dived inside, we actually retrieved the tag. The tag was intact, all the anchors, everything was intact. That told me that she died, right? And when I was standing in that water, it was about yay high, so about 5 feet. She should have never been in water that shallow. Now what happened there, right? 8,000 cusecs of water flowing through the Kaveri, through that area for just 1 day. In a normal monsoonal year, the things would happen the same way. She would migrate upstream to go and spawn. But she has a couple of months to make her way back down to the safe havens that they know of. In ecology, we call this site fidelity, when animals recognize where they are, right? So even a fish, they're so in tuned with their habitats, right? That Mara knew she had to go back there. But since this water reduced, as soon as you close those dam gates, the water level drops so drastically. She got trapped in a small side pool and she's probably fell prey to a crocodile or something of the sort. So, you know, we could talk about the impacts that we have. They're there to see. If you spend time enough in these areas, you will see it yourself. So that there is an impact. But the good thing is that there are things that we can do to change these things, right? For example, the reason why this happened is because there are 3-4 dams upriver that are controlling the amount of water that's flowing through. Now, even our dams today, there's something called e-flow, environmental flow, right? And a lot of this is justified during the monsoon, when there's already an excess of water. And when I've spoken to a couple of people about this, the amount of water that should have been released during that summer to be able to maintain a certain amount of water temperature, to be able to maintain a certain amount of oxygen, to allow these fish to, carry on their daily process, moving from a deep pool to a shallow rapid and back and forth because they're hunting, etc. It's actually not that, it's not a large amount of water. It's just that it has to be timed the right way. So even in Bangalore, I think the way we manage our water is something that should be in the forefront of our discussion. If you just give me 30 seconds, I had an experience just the other day at our home. Right? It was so ironic. It was raining the whole night, and for some reason our motor burnt out. The tanks on top, the overhead tanks were empty. And it was just raining the entire time, the traffic was out, and we couldn't get someone to come and fill the tanks up. And I was like, wow, isn't that a solution, right? That we could just catch that water that's falling on top of your roof and fill that tank up. It would have filled in like half an hour, 45 minutes. So maybe, the thinking is that the way we are managing this water really needs a little thought.
Thank you, Naren. I'm going to come to Shashank, then Avinash to you for a point you made. But Shashank, you told me something very interesting, that Bangalore is actually doing a good job with STP management. Enlighten us with that. What do you mean that we are doing a good job with retreating our water the right way?
So, means again, it's a relative thing, right? So, like when you look at the entire country, so the average rate of treatment is somewhere in cities around 30 to 40%.
Could you talk what that treating means, and maybe microphone a little bit towards your...
Okay.
Yeah.
So, the way that means the treatment happens per se, like once you use the water, you flush it down, it goes through the sink, it ends up in a STP, which is a sewage treatment plant, and then it goes through biological and chemical treatment per se to clean it up, and then maybe it goes down the drain, or it goes to a lake or like a nearby, or if you're staying in apartments, it's a significant chance that it's coming back to you as flushing water. So in that way, like Bangalore, the big BWSS BSTPs are actually treating 80% of the sewage that they are receiving. So it's like you are double the national average. So we are doing a really great job of treating the water. But again, when you think of it in a larger sense, you are getting this water from the river to on top of a hill, then you're treating and then releasing it. So don't you think there should be a better use of this water rather than just again letting it downstream, maybe go to the downstream rivers or like further down the lakes or something like that? Don't you think basically that we should be kind of looking at how to make the most of it now that the water has come from say 0 elevation to 900 meters elevation, and then how do you actually maximize the use by maybe, okay, do not I don't propose it for like being used like for drinking or human purposes, but yeah, your construction can be done through it, your road cleaning or your industries, they can all use this water. Why are we not thinking of making the most of the water that we have here? And the other bit I would like to say is people who stay in apartments, right? You need to have an STP. So how many people actually know where the STP in your apartment is? And how many of you have visited it? So
it's smelling all the time.
yeah,
Nobody visits
exactly.
it.
Yeah. Also, not only smell, right? It's also the sound. People are like my previous apartment complex where I used to live. People whose units were near to the STP, they asked the RWA to shut off the STP in the night because the motors were making too much sound. So these are the things that we kind of like not look at, but the thing. So basically, when you treat, like the treatment does not happen throughout the time. Okay, it's back. Yeah. So when the treatment is stopped for a while, so what happens is basically then you have this smelling problem when the water is stored for a longer time when it's supposed to be like moving, and all of these issues start coming up. So how do we see that these STPs are actually not only like something that we should avoid, but also something that kind of makes sure that you have water, especially during scarcities, because your flushing water is 30% of your total water in the day-to-day usage. Your parks are getting, your green spaces within the apartments are using this treated water. Your common area cleaning is happening through this water. So in the times when you are relying on these super expensive tankers or dry bore wells, maybe you can just use this to not use the clean water or fresh water for these purposes which actually don't need that quality of water.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one question, Avinash, to you, then I'm going to open for audience to see if they have any questions. You gave me a very fascinating image of the lakes not being lakes in Bangalore, but actually a river as it continues down the path. Could you talk to us about what you mean by that when you say that it's actually a flow where it goes through? And there is this large river, if you consider all the lakes to be interconnected rather than pockets of it. What did you mean by that when you said
so that? I come back to what Madhuri was pointing out, right? I mean, we speak about the Kaveri, but here Bangalore is on a little ridge and it has its own little watersheds. It has actually two broad valleys, right? In two river basins. 2/3 of Bangalore is in the river basin called the Dakshina Pinakini, which Madhuri referred to. The other 1/3 is a part of the Vrishbhavati and the Arkavati. They join and that's a part of the Kaveri basin, right? 2/3 of Bangalore is actually not in the Kaveri basin. But this river, Dakshina Pinakini, from my understanding and my conversations with farmers and everybody around, was never a perennial river. And what we have as a network of lakes, what we call lakes, remember that what we refer to as lakes also are not, historically they are not natural. They are all tanks. Technically they are tanks. They are a bund thrown across a valley, so they are very small dams. So historically what has happened over the last 1,000 years is that you've thrown these bunds across the valley. You've held what would have been a riverbed, and it fills up. Once it fills up, it overflows to the next. So it's a cascade of such tanks, right? And that is the river. The river is not different from this cascade. In our imagination, we think of a river as a riverbed where water is flowing or it's dry. But here the Dakshina Pinakini is the cascade of tanks, and the cascade of tanks is the river. And therefore, when you have a monsoon like the 2022 monsoon, the first time in my lifetime, I actually saw the Dakshina Pinakini flowing because it had filled up, and all the kodis, the local language is kodi bilta ide, kere kodi bilta ide. So all the kodis, every tank was overflowing into the next, sometimes over roads, right, which we see in the news. We see only the roads on the news that are overflowed, but that's the river, and that's what I was referring to, Vinod. But I do want to add a little bit,
please,
especially after Shashank said what he said, that, you know, going back to the theme, you know, about the bigger picture that I painted earlier, what is now important is how does a city now that's growing like this reimagine its tanks, its cascade of tanks, its groundwater, its rainwater, and redefine a relationship here, right? So can we think about the role of our tanks differently? The tanks emerged when there was a command area, there was paddy irrigation growing, there was some tanks for cattle, there were some tanks which were empty so that from in a flood year they were filled up. How do we understand the different functions of these tanks and reinvent the role of these tanks today, which is suitable contemporarily, right? And I think Bangalore is actually demonstrating some very interesting ideas here. We have a very active citizen group. Please be a part of the citizen group that is looking, you know, do rainwater harvesting in your house, go connect with the citizen group that's looking after the tank close to your house, so on and so forth. But Bangalore also at a larger scale has an interesting project of reuse of wastewater that Shashank was talking about, not just at an apartment scale, but 880 million liters of Bangalore's domestic water. What's very important is this, as Madhuri pointed out, should be limited to its domestic water. That is treated. So Bangalore is treating that. It is then sharing this treated wastewater with a series of tanks in Kolar, in Chikballapur, and in Bangalore rural districts. Now these three districts went dry. They are in the rain shadow region, so they have relatively low rainfall. They went dry from a groundwater. They were all dependent on tanks historically. But borewells came, groundwater was pumped for irrigation, not for urban use, for irrigation intensively, and they went dry, and it got to a point that they were declared to be in permanent drought, hydrological drought. But through political action, that is by demanding the politicians for a solution, the state has responded with treating wastewater of Bangalore and putting it into these lakes. Now that story too, there was a lot of activism. One narrative was Bangalore is shipping its poison, right? But that went to court. There was monitoring, there was improvement in the treatment system. Institutions can do better to make this solution stronger. But then Bangalore is now a net generator of nutrients and water from the perspective of its surrounding districts. All this water is gone. Studies have been done to show that in Kolar, reverse migration is beginning. You know, I'm connecting it back to the larger economic conversation that I brought. So Kolar, now with water going back, livelihoods are improving in Kolar, and many of the youngsters who came, also thanks to COVID, right, they went back, they found there's water, right, and economy there because of this sharing of resource is beginning to see some kind of a change. The question is, so these kind of reimaginations are possible. Bangalore could also be doing it with its own tanks. Can the tanks of Bangalore be the place where Bangalore's wastewater resides, recharges groundwater, and we then cycle it, right, as good water? The important thing for this solution to work is we need to have good monitoring systems, risk detection systems, and risk response systems in which citizens, the state, and our markets have to work together. And that imagination, we really need to work together.
Thank you. We're going to open for 2 questions from the audience. There are more than 2 hands, so I'm going to try to get to you first. Yeah.
Hi, this is Praveen here. I do real estate consulting for a living, so that's not going to stop. They are hungry, and sustainability, net zero is taking its time. But my question is, he's talking about the greenery. He's talking about the 100-story into 3 energy. Isn't there like a digital twin of this entire ecosystem, saying that it starts from here, so much of energy is used, so much is wasted at this point in time. and then comes to the city where you look at it as an ecosystem where it can be self-sufficient. So there are a lot of factors playing around, right? Let's say Mandya for sugarcane, it uses a lot of water. So is there a study that says that as a state or as supplies across moving around, how do we look at it holistically and not in pieces?
Why don't you take?
I don't know.
Yeah, I can take this question actually. So I think, to come back to your point, right, when I shared about rivers of Bangalore, it was to, acknowledge the loss that we have, to value what we get from far away. I think that's important to acknowledge that what we have lost, right? So coming back to your question, I think one of the things that we see in Bangalore or anywhere, right, is that the primary usage of water is irrigation. A lot of it, even in Kolar, when the water went, we had gone in the field to just check when treated water went there. They were growing something else before, like grapes and things like that. They started shifting to paddy. And now the cycle of, the whole thing of needing more water never breaks actually. So I think the way we use water for irrigation, the way we use water in Bangalore, when they had the ban, right, last year, they said you cannot use Kaveri water for washing your cars or gardening. Why are you using Kaveri water every day of the year for washing your cars? Why should it be allowed actually? Why are we not using treated water or some other source of water like harvest rainwater? So I think it's where we feel the solution should lie in is demand management more than trying to produce more and more water from far away. That's where I brought that story, because saying how do you actually manage your demand? We don't talk about that. So when Kaveri water gets supplied, right, there's a lot of inequity. Right, a lot of people don't get that water. So it's not the 135 LPCD actually. There's some people who are getting water, maybe 300 LPCD. All of it comes to that apartment, falls into one tank, used for flushing, used for gardening, used for everything. Right, so why don't we value Kaveri water, which is coming from so far away, taking it away from all these beings which need that water? So that's what I feel that policies where, there is already on paper drip irrigation. They talk about saying they have to promote drip irrigation. But I think as, Avinash was saying, it is about going to those communities, because what sits in paper will never translate onto ground until there's community action where institutions, citizens, everybody come together and say, okay, how do we value the water we have, the water that we generate as sewage? How do we do it? I think that conversation has to happen in every apartment too.
So just to add as a response to your question, the other thing is, that you talked about a digital twill and brag. I think what we don't have is a good river basin institution, right? I mean, somewhere you were getting to, okay, if I look at a river basin, what are the different allocations of water, what are the different uses of water, and how do we manage it? And how do we be fair in doing that, right? So I think what we need to develop are good river basin institutions, which we don't have today. I mean, that's what my response to your question.
Okay, thanks for the wonderful discussion. I'll start with the KC Valley project, which you just have said. Imagine Bangalore poops and pees, and Kolar gets secondary treated filtered water, and BWSSB says it's a positive story. But unfortunately, none of this environment measuring whatever the data they say, it's completely fake. And being worked in Kolar and Chikkaballapur area, it kind of created a false brutal hope, where earlier they used to grow drought resistant crops. Now Kolar Chikkaballapura, it's completely a tomato world, and people are now, couple of political parties, they are now promoting them as tomato peoples to get more votes, and instead of religion their water works. Water is the main voting factor, and they are creating an illusion that we will bring Kaveri to you for drinking and Yettinhole for agriculture, and yes. and the ponds they have filled throughout the year, the depth will be similar. So in a rough way, it creates a lot of nutrient load, and most of the ecological impact reports say that birds are coming back. But in reality, when there is a less water, it creates a multiple microhabitats so that multiple aquatic bird species can live. But now the reality is that only cormorants live in the lakes, and inside the water only hardy species like tilapia, these thrive. So in a way, less diversity, more density, but people are creating this as a positive story, and at the same time, farmers, they are waiting this year whether the water will come from Ethinhole and or next year, and they are planning to invest more for agriculture. What's your take on this? In a way, it has eroded whole generation knowledge of what they used to grow, and when I walked in that land, every lake had a story. If you imagine like streams, first order streams used to be mostly drinking water. Imagine that as a lake. Second order used to be a household or other purpose, and third order used to be usually for agriculture or other purpose. Now first order, second order, third order, all the three order ponds has the same effluents or nutrient loads, and mixed with the local sewage where because of unmanaged channels. And in every lake I see from 1st century to 8th century Nolamba dynasty's carvings of crocodiles, fishes they brought. And what's your take on this?
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, you've said a lot. There's a lot to unpack there, right? So first point I want to make is this whole thing about, so it is not that Bangalore has to send its water out. The first thing Bangalore has to do is to see how it can manage its own tanks and lakes, and put the treated wastewater within Bangalore's own tanks and lakes. And there are examples. You refer to Jakur, there is Saraki, there are 43 lakes where this is already happening, right? So firstly, this is not a solution for them and not us. Okay, let's get that out of the way. First, it has to work. And therefore, I said monitoring systems have to be built where everybody has to participate. As far as your stream flows go, my understanding is that Kolar, independent of Bangalore, Kolar or Chikballapur or wherever, had reached a point where all this had dried out. The groundwater levels were 1,200 feet, 1,500 feet, getting close to 2,000 feet. There were no base flows, so there was no stream flows, or there was no river flows, right? The ecological bit, when you take the water back there, how do you manage it better is a very valid question. How do you build institutions, work with communities to manage it better is a very, very valid question. Where I disagree with you is my overriding experience when I travel on the ground, speak to farmers, speak to people, is please send us water, don't send us acid. They are saying you don't send industrial wastewater. Otherwise, also remember, if we didn't do this project, this water still went. It went downstream to Tamil Nadu instead of, and there, because we are not using it, it's not within our political boundary, the stake for us to clean it is even less, right? And therefore you send less quality treated water downstream. Even that farmers are using. If you go, farmers are still picking that water up and using it, and they are showing a part of the solution according to me. So it's a contestation of narratives here.
Awesome. So we are up on time. The next is the movie, so we're going to try to get to it, but I want to summarize this. When you registered, you would have got a booklet. In that, there is citizen participation programs. All of them, all of their work, what they do, how can you contribute, all of that information is available. We've got some of the waters from different rivers up on microscope for you to actually see. Some of the kids have put that up. Please participate, question. These folks will be around for at least another 15-20 minutes before they run away. Catch them, be curious about it. But really, the next time when you open the tap, just be conscious of the fact that it went through multiple hands, went through multiple land, maybe even did multiple pipes and leaks before it got to you. So please make sure that you conserve it. I mean, if you're thirsty, we still have water at the back, so we're not saying don't drink water, but ensure that you at least know where your water is coming from. I really hope this session was useful for you to understand. More hands can now be up and about, but I really appreciate Shashank, Avinash, Madhuri and Naren. Thank you for coming and joining us and really answering this question, Bangalore, where is your water coming from? Thank you, everybody.
There's a public information site.